Today's topic is
law enforcement in China versus law enforcement in the West.
I remember you. You left my spirit. With you high is all I'm feeling. Remember how we felt alive.
So where are we going today?
Well, we're not going anywhere in particular because, well, we were supposed to be doing a special scooter episode, but I'm on a scooter and, well, you're not on a scooter. Maybe you could explain why.
There's a very good reason for that. Now, I lent it to one of my friends, and he was downtown in Huizhou. And it's actually a fairly lax city to ride motorcycles and whatnot, but some of his personal registration papers and stuff were not in order.
So his driver's license wasn't valid.
Right. So when he got pulled over near a shopping mall, in the past you get a slap on the wrist, but they took his scooter away, which was my scooter, and then also took down his details and were threatening him with 15 days detention and about $1,000 fine.
It's ridiculous.
So
totally $1,000, eh?
Yeah, insane punishment for that. So the scooter's gone, and now I'm riding Moriarty, and that kind of sucks.
Yeah. So basically, it's not possible for you to get your scooter back, right?
No.
Okay. It was either he pays the fine and gets detention,
right,
or he just lets the scooter go.
And not only that, if he had taken the fine and taken the detention, he'd never be able to drive in China again. That was another piece of the punishment.
Sure, gotcha. Okay. Well, I guess by now you've figured out that today we're talking about law enforcement in China. And actually, first of all, I have to make a distinction. In the first tier cities like Shenzhen, where I live, Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, Beijing, the law is enforced a lot stricter than it is in cities like here. This is what, a third tier city?
Third tier, yeah.
Third tier. So, you can't just generalize about the whole of China, but in general, in the first tier cities, it's pretty strict. On the way down here today, in my car, I passed 3 roadblocks where they were confiscating unlicensed cars. So, like that Santana that Prozzy just bought? Yeah. I saw them pulling over specifically cars of that generation, and in fact the same Santana that he got is the ones I saw them loading up on the trucks, and old Jettas and stuff. So they're specifically looking for cars that look old, and they were pulling them over, checking their paperwork, and then obviously if they didn't pass, they were taking them away and confiscating them.
Sure.
But that doesn't really happen around in these smaller cities.
Especially like when I first came here, we really didn't have to deal with traffic laws at all. It is getting much, much worse, and obviously my friend's situation with the scooter proves that, but in the first tier cities is really where they throw the book at you, like you said.
And once again, I'd like to just point out that law enforcement in China is actually very sporadic. Now, overseas, it's more a constant. You know that if you break a traffic law or something, that's it. You're going to get caught. If you go through, if you do something bad on the road, or if you break a law, there's a very good chance you're going to get caught. But here in China, I feel like you can go around breaking the law as much as you want, really, as long as you're not doing something terrible. And you'll be left alone unless there's something important happening, like a holiday or a government official is coming down to visit the city or something. Then they ramp up the law enforcement, and then it's incredibly strict. You can't even jaywalk or something during that time.
And you'll see fleets of motorcycle cops out, cops lining every street. And actually, like you said, if it's some sort of government officials in town or something like that, or a lot of cities actually have special titles, and it's kind of ridiculous. Like Huizhou is called the polite city of China, and they have something called the Polite City Crackdown every year, where they go and just clear everything out, like street vendors, prostitution businesses get shut down, motorcycles are automatically illegal in that week, right?
Yeah,
and then all
correct.
of a sudden they enforce it, and then when the officials and stuff kind of go away and everyone does their tours, everything just goes back to chaos again.
Yeah, pretty much. So that's why it's sporadic, and you need to keep your finger on the pulse. If you live here and it's that Wenming time, because Shenzhen also has that civilized city title,
right?
And they want to uphold that. So during that period, they will be incredibly strict on all the laws,
right?
And they'll, for instance, like buskers and street sellers and stuff, they will actually go and get rid of them.
Right.
Confiscate their stuff, take them off the streets. But then when it's all done, everything goes back to normal usually.
Sure.
Okay, so I would actually like to talk about us as in expats, all right? And I'd like to talk about the expat arrogance here. It's something that I think we're all guilty of at one point or another. but it's something that actually pisses me off a lot, to be fair. Basically, when you come here as an expat, at first you're very cautious, and then you start to realize that, yeah, you can actually get away with a lot.
Right.
Okay, and it goes to people's heads, and a lot of the expats I know here, they're like, oh, it doesn't matter, you can do what you want here in China, because there is a lot of personal freedom. And for instance, in Shenzhen, where motorcycles are completely banned, I still come across people who are saying, like, it doesn't matter, you just ride, they're not going to do anything to you, you're a foreigner. But it's actually not true. It's not true at all. There are certain, like, bubble areas like Shirko where you can still drive a scooter like this one.
Sure.
You can ride around there in a little bubble, but if you kind of go over a certain line, the cops are going to confiscate the scooter and you will get detention. I've heard of a couple people now have had to serve like 10 days detention.
Sure.
You know, they've had their, well, they're riding without licenses, and that's another one of the arrogances here. It's like, oh, don't worry, just, you can ride without a driver's license, you could drive without a driver's license.
Sure.
I mean, you see shit like this guy over here, just
It's completely
randomly,
illegal, yeah.
Yeah, it's completely illegal. And you think that you could just do it without any repercussions, but you can't. So it extends to everything, like drug taking and all that. Like, foreigners get arrogant, and then that's their downfall, you know?
Absolutely.
I've seen it happen a lot. I'm sure you have too.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of, you know, our viewers and a lot of foreigners actually want to know kind of some of the hot laws and like what actually happens to you if you get caught doing them.
Okay.
And the first one, you just mentioned drugs, right? So let's talk about that. Now, due to the recent law changes and legal changes in the West, especially in America, right?
Yeah.
Like, marijuana is pretty much legal now.
Yeah.
At least
in America.
decriminalized in a lot of places, right? And so a lot of people have kind of gotten used to that comfort back home. They can smoke a joint, smoke a bowl, or do whatever they do, and come over here and they figured the whole world's kind of changing their attitude about the whole thing, and that's just not the case. In fact, marijuana is punished just like heroin or cocaine or anything here, and you will go to jail, and if you traffic even a little bit, you can get the death penalty. And
Correct.
that's very true.
Correct. That's something that, yes, I have to keep telling people about this, and then I get a lot of comments saying like, oh, like, screw you, like, you know, you drink alcohol, it's just as bad and all that. It's not about that. It's not that age-old debate.
No.
You know, China has something which they call the 100 years of humiliation, right? Which was brought about by the Opium Wars and all that nonsense, which involved drugs and foreigners. So it doesn't matter if it wasn't related or whatever the case. The fact of the matter is, if you're a foreigner and you're taking drugs, you are going to get into a lot of trouble if you're caught here. So basically, you have to avoid that at all costs. So stay away from drugs. In fact, about a month ago, there was that big underground rave in Shenzhen where they basically came in and they caught, what was it, like 400 people? They bust them off to police stations, and then they tested them for drugs. The guys that were positive for drugs, they kept them in detention for 3 days. I don't know if they're going to get deported or what, but it was just like for smoking weed, basically. Thing is, it turned into such a big, like, international thing that they kind of just, I think, let everyone go, and they just thought it would be too much of a hassle, really, at the end of the day. But it's a clear danger. It's there, it's happening. If you're involved in drugs in China, there's a big chance that you're going to get into trouble.
I want to point out one more thing about that, is there's no legal loopholes that are going to help you out. For example, if you're in a European country that still has illegal status of marijuana, there's no real laws that say, okay, if you smoked weed and then you came to this country, but we test you and it's in your system, that's illegal. It doesn't work like that, but that is how it works in China. So let's say you go and smoke weed and then you fly to China. If you get a P test from your employer and they catch you, that's tantamount to actually consuming drugs in China.
Correct.
So that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, so basically we could go on about it forever, and there are going to be lots of people disagreeing in the comments, but a fact is a fact. If you smoke weed or take any kind of narcotics here in China, you will get into trouble. If they catch you, you'll get the book thrown at you, so stay away. And I know there are places like in Yunnan, in Dali, where it's very open, people smoke weed, and you know, those areas are very well known for that, but you're still taking a risk. So stay away from drugs and you'll be fine. There's plenty of, like, you could drink alcohol all you want here, you know. Okay, so that's drugs. How about you talk about traffic?
Well, Actually, I want to link to a video driving in China that I just put out, and we actually drove in that Santana that you just mentioned, the ones that were getting snagged in Shenzhen. But anyway, driving laws in China are a bit tricky because back home, at least where I'm from, if you do something bad in a car, the police officer will pull out in his police squad car, pull you over, license and registration, give you a ticket, maybe even go to jail depending on what you did, right?
Yeah.
But in China, there is no such thing as police chases, and all enforcement is done with cameras, which they have a super intricate system here. I've gotten tickets in the middle of nowhere. I don't know about you.
Yeah, absolutely. We
And,
wouldn't expect there's no power.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also police checkpoints, which you just mentioned that you saw earlier, right?
Yeah.
That's pretty much how they nab people. Now, because of that, people are not too scared to actually break traffic laws. They break them all the time because as long as you know where the cameras are or the checkpoints are, you're not going to get in trouble, right?
Correct.
So people do all kinds of crazy stuff, to be honest. It's actually quite dangerous to drive here. And one little personal story I have is my mother-in-law missed an exit on the highway, and I was in the passenger seat, and she drove the wrong way, reverse, on the highway as cars were flying out, and drove up the off-ramp, like the wrong way, and
Oh,
thought
boy.
it was completely fine. Like she had no concept that was like a bad thing to do, and she didn't get in trouble for it. And I'm going to ask you, what if you did that where you're from?
Well, yeah, of course you're going to end up in jail. Other drivers will stop you. In fact, there's been a rash of incidences in, I think it's Australia. How about we go left here?
Okay.
In Australia, where actually local citizens are stopping Chinese tourists because Chinese tourists are renting cars.
Sure.
And they're actually physically stopping them when they do these bad things like drive the wrong way on the road, taking their keys away and like giving them to the local police station and saying, look, these guys are doing this.
That's
So,
pretty funny.
It's definitely a Chinese thing, and you know they take it with them wherever they go. This bad driving, because you get used to it here. People just randomly break the law.
Absolutely.
But look at my video about the dash cam scam, where I got 3,000 RMB, a $500 US fine, you know, for going over a white line, right?
Yeah.
So if you're caught on camera, there's nothing you can do. You can't like dispute it. They've got proof and evidence, and that's it. Right, and there's a horrible new thing in Shenzhen now that if you've got outstanding fines,
Yeah.
and you just drive your car, and any of these cameras, you see like that camera up there,
Right.
if they catch you driving, then they just give you another fine because you're driving with a fine.
Wow.
And apparently it's like 300 RMB every time. And you know, there's a limit that's like they can only give you one a day, but still think about that, that's going to build up, right? So yeah, they do enforce very strictly the camera stuff. Also, even here in Huizhou, near your house, they've got all those new one-way roads, right?
Yep.
They're enforcing that, aren't they?
Yep.
Like, yep. So
I already got a ticket from one of those, actually.
okay.
I know I don't want to get into like political stuff or talk about things that are too sensitive, but can you talk a little bit about prostitution, because a lot of subscribers ask me about that.
Okay, well, yeah, we all know if you live here in China, prostitution is actually very openly advertised.
Right.
You get cards put under your door in your hotel or even in your own home,
Sure.
and you can walk down the street and you can be kind of like, you have women walk up to you and say, hey, pretty girl, you want a pretty girl, that kind of thing, depending on the area you're in, of course. It's incredibly open, but at the same time it's completely illegal in China. You know, any kind of prostitution or even pornography is illegal here. So it's a catch-22. We're not here to air any dirty laundry, so we're not going to go into it too, you know, in depth. However, you know, it's another one of those things that's clamped down on whenever there's a government official or a special holiday, but then, you know, it's not really enforced otherwise when no one's around.
Exactly. I mean, it's just so pervasive, but it's just one of, like you said, one of those things that they decide, okay, now it's illegal, and then it goes back to normal.
Yeah.
So when they do prostitution raids, actually, some of the higher up people will know when they're going to come around, but you know, the average Joe that goes and gets a, you know, a little tug job or something in his local place, right, his massage parlor usually, they don't really know what's going to happen. And what they'll do is they'll bust into the rooms, right? They'll bust into the dens and go in there and take out the client and also take out all the prostitutes and kind of parade them. They'll put them on the street in front of there,
Yeah.
and they'll just handcuff them and put placards on them sometimes as well.
Yeah. Watch out behind you.
And then
Okay.
they will
Yeah.
they'll basically publicly shame them and then give them a fine and jail time.
Yeah.
So it is
that's
pretty
right.
serious.
Yeah, it is. It's incredibly serious. So once again, it's all about knowing when they're going to crack down. It's kind of silly.
Now, one thing I think a huge loophole that is always, the law is always broken on this in China that I've noticed, is business licensing, right? Especially for street stalls or for restaurants, in fact. Have you noticed this?
Oh yeah, in fact I got a very good example. Actually 2 weeks ago I went to visit a friend, and he lives on a street that's got a bustling trade in like little bars and little restaurants and things. And when I arrived at his house, all the shutters were closed, and I was wondering, why is it so quiet here? And then I noticed the Chengguan, which is like the urban management. It's kind of like a sort of an arm of the police that makes sure that everyone's behaving and they don't put like street stalls out and they're not like disrupting the pavement and stuff.
I'll be honest with you, they're basically uneducated thugs that get to do the dirty work of the cops.
Oh, absolutely. Anyway, they were walking up and down, and there were a couple of shops that were open, and they were checking business licenses, and they were giving trouble to everyone. So obviously the connected shops had received a warning beforehand and had closed down, because when I'd finished visiting my friend and I went down, all the shops that were closed before were suddenly open again. But the shops that those Chengguan were checking out, they were all shut with like signs stuck over them saying, you know, like condemned or not allowed to operate, you know.
Right.
So yeah.
For sure, I've noticed like so many businesses, either they pay for their license or they run without it. Whenever they come in to do sweeps, they close down for a little while, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah.
That's kind of how it works.
So one of the last things I want to touch on is the fact that in China, you do not have a judicial system akin to the ones that we have back home, where you hire a lawyer. If you get arrested, there's a good chance you can get away with what you've done. Look at all the bikers.
Yeah.
Wow. And all of those are illegal, by the way. Just
It's a Chingchi Liger.
hey, nice.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, in China, if you get caught for a crime, then you are pretty much guilty. Do you know why? This year there was a 99% conviction rate for crimes, and I find that absolutely terrifying, because if you get blamed for something that you didn't even do, you're going to jail. Like, there's no legal recourse, right?
It is. It's incredibly disturbing. And another thing, as a foreigner, you're here as a guest in the country, right? You have your visa. If you get into legal trouble, like seriously, 9 times out of 10, you're getting deported. That's
Right.
just the way it is. If you have to serve a sentence, you will serve a sentence, you know, and
Right.
they'll stick you. They've got like special jails for foreigners here, actually.
Yeah, the last jail that you go to before you get deported is actually in Inner Mongolia.
Well, I know that like in Shoko area, somewhere there, they've got an actual jail for foreigners. It's actually just like a little garden.
No way.
And, you know, they've got a 7-Eleven and everything in there. Yeah. But, you know, there are special jails for foreigners. And they stick you in there, and then they figure out how to deport you, basically.
Right. Yeah, you're not going to get out of jail and resume your normal life back in China.
I mean, it's just the way it is. If you fall afoul of the law here, then that's pretty much it. Your time here is done. Unless you do something incredibly bad, like smuggling drugs, then
you're dead.
you will get the death penalty. You can look it up. There are a couple of
they've
foreigners
executed people.
recently.
Right.
A guy from England, South African woman, a bunch of people from, you know, overseas who've landed here, try to drug mule, and they end up getting the death penalty.
Right.
So it's not very widely publicized, but it's true. You can look it up.
Absolutely.
So my biggest piece of advice to anyone coming to visit or live in China, just leave the bloody drugs alone. I mean, I can't say that enough. Everything else you can get away with, more or less.
I was just going to say, you can pretty much get away with everything except that.
Yeah, I mean, and murder, obviously. You don't want to be
Obviously, yeah.
murdering anyone.
If you have murder as one of your hobbies, leave that at home as well.
Yeah. Okay, Simok, so I guess that pretty much wraps it up for today. Anything you want to say to our audience before we sign off?
As always, like, comment, and subscribe, and leave the bong at home.
Yep, and if you don't like, comment, or subscribe, like this guy driving the wrong way down the road in his shit tractor. See that guy? Who are you flashing at? That guy does not subscribe
With metal
to us.
rods about to impale us.
He doesn't subscribe to us. But either way, remember, as always, guys, wherever you are, stay awesome.